Hey, Kristen. Hey, Kristen, how is our audio, darling? Waiting. Wonderful. Yay! That's amazing. That's
great. Hi.
This is very funny. We've never actually done this before. I've never done it in the Spotlight live in my home. I love this.
Well, thank you.
Yes.
It's good to be here.
It's amazing. Yeah. Welcome to In the Spotlight Live with Tanya Geisler. I'm Tanya Geisler.
I'm Jen Brown.
Yay! We're in my living room. There will be cats coming in and out. And Jen is all the way up here from Australia. Australia. Yes. And we are, if you're joining us over on Facebook, come on over to Crowdcast, and that's where we're actually going to be able to see your questions. We can't actually see them on Facebook, even though it's a great way for you to picture us. And if you are watching on Crowdcast, by all means, please go ahead and share. And when you're on Crowdcast, go ahead and ask your question by clicking on that handy-dandy Ask a Question button, which is very specific about what it wants you to do. So just super high level, and the Spotlight is all about speaking with and shining a spotlight on people in my world, my realm, people that I look up to, my mentors, teachers, my clients, people that I think are doing some really interesting things in the world. Jen Brown, founder of Sparta Chicks, is one such person. And I really just love that we get to do this. I'll link it up. So, Jen, tell us all about you.
Oh my gosh. Where do we start?
Yeah, where do we start? Let's just start here. Okay. Let's start here. Because one of the things we're always here. We're talking about the imposter complex. We're talking about stepping into a starring role. We're talking about the spotlight. But I've already used some language that might not be familiar to people, including Sparta Chicks. So can you tell us what the Sparta Chicks are all about?
So Sparta Chicks is a online business, online community movement made up of women and supportive dudes. I'm not leaving you out, guys. And it's really all about chasing those dreams and goals that you have, especially the secret ones that you never really tell anybody about, and recognizing that you're going to feel fear and resistance and sabotage yourself. There's going to be hurdles, but still find a way to keep moving forward, keep chasing those goals, whatever they are, whether they're business, professional, or particularly sporting, health-related goals.
Mm-hmm. So you came to me, we came together through the Starring Role Academy, and I had always identified you as a coach of triathletes and marathoners, and I realized that's a huge aspect of what you do, but it's just but one aspect of what you do. So can you tell us how you got to this place of coach and in that particular realm, and then how it's expanded beyond?
Oh gosh, how long do we have?
27 minutes.
So I was a lawyer once upon a time. Don't hold it against me. Disillusioned, started running as a way to lose weight because I packed it on working stupid hours.
Disillusionment will do that for you.
Disillusionment, definitely, and chocolate at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Got into running, then I got into being injured runner, and then I got into finding ways that helped me get around my injuries. Long story short, I started working as a personal trainer. Eventually threw away law, and then one day one of my personal training clients, who was also a triathlete, said to me, "Would you mind coaching me in triathlon?" And I said, "I suppose I can." I describe it as one of those moments when people see something in you can't see in yourself. And then so I started coaching triathletes, runners, mainly those two sports, but I also have a long history in hiking, outdoor adventures, mountaineering, all sorts of stuff. So my client load is very varied. But as I started coaching, I started to realize I was having conversations with female clients that I wasn't having with male clients. So conversations around fear and self-doubt, about worrying what other people are going to think of you if you enter a race or if you don't finish a race. All these conversations about the mental side of sport and really life. And I also realised that these conversations weren't being discussed in the sports context at all. These days, sort of 2 years after I've launched Sparta Chicks, we're having a lot more of these conversations in a business setting, around business work, around professional careers, but we're still not discussing it when it comes to other goals in our life. And I realised too that the thing that holds us back is not the physical stuff. The physical stuff is actually really easy to create. The body's just a machine. It'll respond to whatever inputs you give it.
Whatever inputs you give it, okay.
Yeah, so it's a machine. You give it the right inputs, it gets the output you want. But what holds us back is all that stuff upstairs, all that, the stories that we tell ourselves about who we are and who we're not, what we can do, what we can't do, the fear and the self-doubt. If I had $1 for every time someone said to me, I'm not a runner, I'm just a jogger, we'd be having this conversation in the Caribbean somewhere, because that's one of the biggest, I think, misconceptions a lot of people have, or one of the biggest stories a lot of us tell ourselves. It's that sense of feeling like a fraud, or that you don't belong, or that you don't deserve to be there. And that is the stuff that actually holds us back. And so to answer your question, Sparta Chicks came about as a way to share those stories, address those issues, and help people to realise too that they're not alone. Because we're not talking about this stuff, especially in a sports context. I felt alone. I felt like I was the only one who felt that way. And I know I've heard from clients and associates that they feel that way too. So Sparta Chicks was my way to open that door and start sharing those conversations and start looking at ways that we can tackle these fears and self-doubt and keep moving forward.
Last week I had Jamie Riddler on. And when you said, honestly, I think she would have said the exact same words probably about 9 years ago to me, but swapping out the words jogger and runner for blogger and writer. And what she said, I remember this, like, I'm not a writer. And she said to me, she said, does your blog know that? I loved that. So what do you say to somebody, so like, for instance, what do you say to somebody who says that they're not a runner, they're just a jogger? So, like, first of all, I'm interested in the answer, but I think this is like a huge, clearly it's a metaphor. We're thinking metaphors, okay? So, yeah. So what do you say to somebody who says, I'm not a runner, I'm a jogger?
So I would say to them, what do you think of when you say the word runner, or you think of the word runner? And this was something I did from when I first got into running. I did the same. I'm not a runner, I'm just a jogger. But when I thought about the story that I was telling myself about running, it was that a runner is a 5 foot tall, it was a classic man that you see running the New York Marathon, 5'10", African runner, male, obviously, wearing god-awful side-split running shorts that very few women actually ever wear in their life. Running at a pace that I couldn't even run if I had to avoid getting hit by a bus. Like, it was so, the perception most people have of what a runner is so far removed from who they think they are and how they see themselves. But there's a massive disconnect. So we create these stories about who a runner is and who a runner isn't. And if you don't fit that mold, that story, then we find ways to re-describe what we do, and always in a way that diminishes it. It's always a lesser descriptor.
And in that lesser descriptor, though, we're also protecting ourselves, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, because I think one of the things I know, and I've talked to a lot of people new to running, and even myself, I remember having this thought process that there was always this fear that someone would call you out and say, you're not a runner because you're so slow, or you're not a runner because you don't look like what a runner should look like. So it's no doubt it's a way of protecting ourselves from that fear of being called out.
Yeah.
I guess.
What is this calling out? Hi, Lori.
Hi, Lori.
See you. Yeah, same couch. Lori, you're going to be on this couch next week. Never mind. I digress. If anybody has any questions, now's a great time to ask a question. We've got answers. Possibly.
We might.
That's the intention, is that we have some answers. This whole getting called out thing, fascinating, man. This is so much bigger than even in a way that it needs to be when we get very granular. So in the star and role work that we've been doing, we have this exercise where we look at who gets to be an authority, who gets to be an expert. And so that's exactly what we're doing with the who gets to be a runner. So when we really get very clear about that, I had this conversation with a client the other day where the relief, there was actually part of the conversation was, I actually just want it out in the open. I'm not, in this case, a lawyer doing a job that mostly lawyers would do. And it was like, why don't you just name that? Why don't you just name that? Because, this person's been in this position for quite some time, and it's like, there's this way that the imposter complex has actually taken hold in a very specific way. The expectation is that this person would be in that job as a lawyer.
I often hear it too. A lot of people say, when pulling back to the running example, people who have done triathlons. So, a triathlon is a swim followed by a bike, cycle, and then a run. I've had numerous people say to me, I've done multiple triathlons, but I still don't call myself a triathlete. I still don't think of myself as a triathlete. And again, it's that perception we have about whether we need to reach a certain bar, whether we need to reach a certain level of performance before we are qualified or justified.
It's so interesting. I've never actually thought about that in the context of an athlete, because there is really this elite quality that comes up that I've never really thought about. At what point do you get to call yourself an athlete? And that's what I think of when you're thinking about triathlete piece.
I think it's a good question, and I think it's a roadblock. I think it's almost a question that everyone who starts a sport, especially like running or triathlon, has to address at some point.
Yeah.
I know a lot of women will not call themselves athletes, even though they do very athletic.
Okay, stop. A lot of women won't call themselves athletes, even though they do athletic things. Okay,
Yes.
So I'm going back to that piece about, does your blog know that you're a writer? Does your blog know that you're not a writer? That was what it is. So how do we have people unpack that? If you're doing athletic things, but you don't call yourself an athlete, when do you get to call yourself an athlete, Jen?
That's a really good question. I think you have to call yourself an athlete before you feel comfortable calling yourself an athlete.
Ding, ding, ding.
Funny that. You have to make the choice to start using the word before you will feel like an athlete, and you'll never feel like an athlete until you start using the word. So if you lace up your shoes and go out this afternoon and do even a run walk, you run for a minute, you walk for 5 minutes, you're a runner. Accept it, name it, call it, own it.
Okay.
Live it.
So that's runner. What about athlete? So it's like, by virtue of running, are you an athlete?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. You heard it here.
You're an athlete.
I ran for 10 minutes today.
You're an athlete. Say it. Say it.
I'm an athlete. And you know why I ran 10 minutes today?
Why?
Because my kid yesterday was like, I can't run more than 5 minutes. And I said, I will run 10 minutes tomorrow, and you run 8, and we'll meet in the middle. Anyway, okay. So we've got a question here. Kristen, how can we get past our feelings of inadequacy / fear of failure / doubts in ourselves to cultivate a new habit like running? Like, if running, a new diet, a new habit seems like a huge mountain in front of us and we have failed before, how can we approach the mountain again with confidence? Such a great question, Kristen.
So, start small. Start small is, I think, the one thing that we...
Like 10 minutes?
1 minute, 30 seconds. 30 seconds. I think when we start to think about getting back into running again, especially if you've run, you have been a runner in the past, it's really easy to get trapped in comparing yourself to your old self or to what you used to be able to do. So for anyone starting out, especially if you're trying to get back into running again, like most things, it is start small. Like, I have clients who start out with 30 seconds of running, 4.5 minutes of walking, and then repeat that 4 or 5 times. So really taking those really small bite-sized chunks. Try not to go out and run for half hour straight up, because you're just repeating, you're setting yourself up for failure. Because if you haven't done anything in 2 years, I don't know anyone who could probably, apart from ex-Olympic athletes, who could probably go out and run for half hour without doing anything. So just start really small. And then also question those stories you're telling yourself in your head about your fear or inadequacy. What is the story going on inside your head? What's that narrative? Because there's a lot to be said for really picking that apart and seeing what's at the core of it. So is it a fear of failing again? Is it a fear of your family, failing again in front of your family, or having them laugh at your latest attempt to get back into fitness again? There is always a much deeper, like everything in life, there's always a much deeper underlying fear issue going on under the surface. And I think when you start to really examine those, question them, don't just take them for granted. I think that you need to do both. You need to do the smart training, start small in terms of the physical side of it, but you also need to examine those stories that you're telling yourself.
Do you ever hear, so a huge part of what I feel like I'm always talking about is that, yes, we're certainly afraid of failing, we're afraid of being called out, we're afraid of, somehow our inability to commit to a running practice is going to end up with that whole bag lady narrative. I'm not quite sure how that connection is made, but somehow it is made. And then usually in business, I can make a very quick and clean through line that often fear of failure is actually fear of success. And usually that's in and around all the beliefs that we have about our inability to handle success, that it means we're going to have to disconnect from people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Is that possibly true in sports as well? Is there actually, have you seen a fear of success in sports? Like, if I'm actually really successful in the sport, have you seen this show up? I mean, I could make up lots of stories about where that might manifest, but curious if there's any truth to that.
I think it is there. But I think the fear of failure is greater. I think there's a small group of people for whom the fear of success is very real. But I think the fear of failing, of doing all the hard work, of not achieving the goal that you've told the world about, generalizing, tends to be greater for women. For men, I don't know. Mother.
So I actually have a very specific. Last time I took a lift, my driver was here from Romania, and his daughter was an elite athlete, bona fide. I'm kidding, like triggering my own imposter complex. Like a tennis player, here from Romania, and he was saying that she's sabotaging herself at absolutely every turn because he's driving a lift, like he's a lift driver, and he's actually, back home, did lots of other things that were far more lucrative, but this was the sacrifice that the family made on behalf of her sport. Yeah. So that just popped in as you were saying that there's, maybe it's at a certain elite level that becomes more problematic, and then where people get, that can disconnect from the people that had been part of their lives before, and, put on pedestals or whatever else, because I think that pedestal work or the triggering, right? Like, I mean, will people be proud of? Will people be happy for me, even though they're like it's couch potatoes? I don't know. I'm just wondering about that too. I'm an athlete, says Lori. Woo! You're an athlete, because Jen says so.
And you're an athlete.
I'm an athlete.
No, say it.
I did 10 minutes, dude. 10 minutes. I am an athlete.
Thank you.
So for you in your work, where does the imposter complex show up loudest and 24 hours for you?
Is it too early for a drink? And how long have we got? So for me, it shows up everywhere. I think most people could say that though in some ways.
Hang on. It shows up in the areas that are important.
Sorry, it shows up in the areas that are important to me. Thank you. For me, the biggest lie of the imposter complex that is my favorite tends to be that I'm not ready or good enough, which I have realized feeds into procrastination and perfectionism for me. So I don't like anything to go out into the world unless it is perfect, which is very hard to do because it's never perfect.
The pencil can always be a little bit sharper.
Exactly. So, I started a podcast this year in February, Sparta Chicks Radio, check it out. But I have been talking about that for I've been talking about that in public for 12 months. It was February last year I started talking about that in public. I don't even know how long before that I started dreaming up the idea. And I can honestly say, hand on my heart, the only reason it didn't start was imposter complex. Yeah. So, yep. so that took me 12 months to get around. And even when I launched the podcast, it was still hanging around. Yeah. But I think I'd resigned myself to the fact it wasn't going to be perfect. I told myself the story that I would improve as a podcaster over time, and the only way I was going to get better as a podcaster would be by doing a podcast, taking action.
Taking action bit by small bit, 30
Small
seconds bit. By 30 seconds.
Exactly.
By 1 minute. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. So that's probably been the biggest place it's showed up in the last 12
pause
months.
for a second. How is the podcast going? Tell us about the podcast.
This is amazing.
You love it. You really love it.
I really love it. It's funny that something that was such a cause of angst and fear and self-doubt is actually one of the favorite things I've done in my career. Full stop. Yeah. End of sentence. Yeah. So, it's been amazing.
So how many episodes have you done?
29 episodes this week, or 30.
This year.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, that's fantastic. How often are you doing them?
Weekly.
Okay.
Every week.
Oh, that is a commitment. What guest was I?
Yeah. 9, 6.
Okay.
You were early. Very early.
And it was so good. You were such a natural, so interested, so curious. And I'm belaboring the point because there's an entire 12-month swath of time where you were sitting on top of this thing that was deeply important to you, that you are deeply skilled at, that is very aligned with your brand of joy and who you are in the world and how you're supposed to show up. And you were sitting on top of it. And that it happened when it needed to happen, I guess. But it happened.
Eventually. It happened.
Yeah.
It's honestly... I'm almost reminded of that old saying. I don't even know who said it, and I'm probably bastardizing it terribly. But it's probably you actually. The idea that you're. I don't even know what it is anymore.
Another language.
Side of resistance.
Yeah.
So that idea that your greatest achievement, or not even achievement might be the wrong word. The thing you are most proud of in life are often the things on the other side of the greatest struggle, fear, uncertainty.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we're just going with, and the work that I do, we call this building your authority thesis. And it's not really necessarily just to say, hey, I won a science fair project when I was in grade 7, and that inextricably links to my launching of the podcast. But thinking back to that time when you won that science fair project in grade 7, there was this moment of, will I be able to, what's going to happen? But we need to remind ourselves of this place when we're about to launch or start something that we've been here before, and that the party is on the other side of the resistance.
It is,
Absolutely is.
And interesting, just on that point of building your authority, one thing that never occurred to me in the 12 months I was thinking about the podcast, one of the stories I was telling myself, the ways the imposter was showing up for me, was by telling myself, I've never done anything like this before. I've never interviewed people. I was a lawyer for 13 years. I have asked a lot of questions and pulled out a lot of people's stories over the years, but I couldn't see that as a skill that transferred into podcasting until I started to realize that it's actually almost the same thing in a lot of ways. It's the same skill. So I had the skills I needed to do the job.
Which is exactly what we were talking about not 1 hour ago, right?
Correct.
About the live coaching.
Yes.
Same thing. I will not say anything more about that because she's got lots of exciting things that are happening. So you're going to have to follow her on Sparta Chicks Radio, Twitter, Instagram. We're going to have all of the links in the show notes to be certain. To follow her, she's got some really cool stuff that's going to be coming up. That she is more than equipped to launch, and it's going to support you in stepping into athlete, and also in all of the other areas in your business and your life, and where you're not wanting to step in and step up. So one of the things we do in the Academy is when I come across something that just stops me in my tracks, we create these graphics called Spotlight Sound Bytes, because they're just yummy and delicious. And one came out from you of a great story you told about being on track. And the soundbite that it was is you have no idea of the impact you're having on people. You have no idea of the impact you're having on people. Like right now, in this moment, you don't know who's thinking about you. You don't know who's about to email you. You don't know what opportunities are just waiting around the corner. The impact that you've already had on people, you don't know. And so, just just feel into that, and then tell us where that came from.
Oh, wow. So one day, earlier this year, I was out on a trail run.
Feeling like you weren't feeling super hot that day.
No, I wasn't feeling super hot that day. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of stuff going on with the business. I'd just been scared by a snake, which in Australia is really never good. There was a narrow section of trail and there was a woman coming in the opposite direction, so I stopped to let her go. I moved past. I had the Sparta Chicks visor on, and I'd moved on, and then I hear her say, "Are you Jen?" And I turned around and said, "Yes, yes." And it was this amazing woman. I won't name her, but she knows who she is. And she came over to me basically with open arms, hugged me, thanked me for the episode that we did together on the imposter complex, and told me how it had really opened her eyes into the ways that she'd struggled with the imposter complex around her training and racing. At the time, she was preparing for her first 100-kilometre race, which was and that episode had really helped her understand the ways she sort of sabotaged or doubted herself, doubted whether she deserved or belonged to be on the start line in the past, and made sure that she didn't fall into that same trap preparing for this race. And I walked away from that shaking my head for the next hour or two on the trails. I just kept saying to myself, I can't believe that happened. It felt really surreal. Mm-hmm. It felt very, I'm not even sure what the word is. I get a little something. It was just it meant more to me than she will ever know. But at the same time, it was confirmation of the work that I have been doing and putting out into the world. And so I'm truly grateful to her for that gift. But it was a great example of, you put your work out into the world. It doesn't matter what it is, and you've got no way of knowing how it's being received. And the fact that you're not hearing about how it's being received doesn't mean it's not being received. It's not having an impact. So just keep doing what you're doing, and you're changing lives in ways you'll never understand.
Ever understand.
Never.
We could think about something different. Small bites, 30 seconds at a time. Next step. Mm-hmm. Then it's 10 minutes. And then it's
and then you're an athlete.
Then it's 100 kilometers.
Then it's 100 kilometers. That's how it
Yes.
happens. Careful. It's a black hole.
Yes. No one's talked to that. Okay, all right, next time. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And any final words?
Just go out, chase your dreams. Accept that you'll have fear. Accept that you'll feel completely scared at times. But life's too short, and you can change lives, and whatever it is you do, and just go and do it.
Right. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Bye.